Welcome, Tangle friends. My name is Annie Reiser. I'm a certified Zentangle teacher and a certified botanical illustrator. And I'd like to welcome you to today's Lunchtime Tangle on the Tangle Sampson. And we're going to use Sampson, that's this pattern here, to create an ornament for our holiday theme. And I was very surprised to see how many people had already watched the Muka star, so I decided to do something that's kind of a companion piece. So they kind of go together, match up, and it's very similar in technique, so it'll be easy for you to pick up on if you watch the Muka star. I do want to point out that I did do already a tutorial on Sampson. It's on my YouTube channel, and that's because I just love this pattern. Being a botanical illustrator, it makes for such a nice botanical theme in many areas that I've been working on. And one of them is I use Sampson in this kind of style on my classes, video classes for Bugle Boy and Honeybee Mine. They both use Sampson as part of the pattern there. So you can see I really do love Sampson, and I'm going to show you today how to shade it in gold. So let's get started. I am using a Zendala from headquarters, and I've already gone ahead and penciled in, well, not penciled, I actually used my ink pen to and a compass to draw the basic shape of the ornament, which is about 2.5 inches wide. It fits nicely on the Zendala. And we're going to go ahead and start by doing the top of our ornament, which I'm just going to pen in. I have to admit that I looked at a lot of Pinterest photos of vintage ornaments so that I could get sort of a vintage look pattern up here. And this is one that comes up a lot. So this is what we're going to do. And then we need to put our little loop. And then I'm going to take a pencil and I'm going to pencil in literally a string. It's going to act like a string in the Zentangle world, if you know what that means, because I'm going to follow that with another little pattern later on to make our string and then our drop shadow on it. So that's what that's for. So I have to tell you that I looked up in Maria's Zenthology book how she does Sampson, again, just as a refresher, and I have to say that my Sampson is more like Icanthus, and Icanthus is actually, there is a pattern called Icanthus that looks like an Icanthus leaf. It's a little bit harder to do, and I kind of morphed Sampson and Icanthus together. So Maria's Sampson basically looks like this. Her leaves are a lot rounder and the edges are much rufflier, kind of like this, which you can do. But I wanted my Icanthus to look, I wanted these leaves, these Sampson leaves, to look a little bit more like the Icanthus. So you will note that mine are a little bit pointier and a little less thick around the middle. So that's what we're going to be doing today. Okay, so before we begin drawing on a pattern on this, I want you to note that this is an ornament. This is a sphere. It's a global shape, a globe shape or a ball shape. So we want to retain that three-dimensionality when we're drawing. When we make our leaves, we don't want to make one that's straight up, right? That will flatten out the ball. So we really always want to concentrate on making our Icanthus, or Sampson, I'm sorry, our Sampson leaves with the midrib at a curve. So let's go ahead and start. Basically following that same curve. And then I'm going to go ahead and build out my leaf. And I'm going to start, I actually kind of like to start at the top. It gives me a little bit more control for whatever reason. So I'm going to go lots of wiggly line. And you notice how this is a little bit pointy. And you get wider at the top, and then you come back down in to the crevice and start forming the next leaf shape according to the vein. And you can get really wiggly here, or you don't have to. You can also make it a little bit straighter, since this is more of a stem. So there's our first Sampson leaf. And then I'm gonna use that beautiful concept of overlap and crossover, and I'm gonna do one here. Get really close to that midrib. Guess I'll finish this side first. I'm making these a little bit fatter than my original workup or sample that I showed you, just because I like that look better than too thin. That's already pretty in its own with that negative space here, but I'm going to go ahead and fill up the whole ball. Let's do one that comes off here. Notice I'm always curving, always bowing my leaf shape. I just love drawing Sampson. I seem to kind of draw it a little differently every time, which is really fun. It's the beauty of it. Okay, so let's do an overlap from here. Let's do one. Drawing behind. So that is pretty much it. Now we get to have all the fun in coloring our ornamentation. And what we do is, just like last time, we're going to take a marker. We're going to take the 05 Micron pen from Sakura. This is kind of a spring green. And we're just going to fill in the background, which is this area behind the leaf, which is called negative space. And we're just going to fill all of that in with a nice kind of saturated stroke. And I will beat up the film so you don't have to sit here and watch me do that. But do enjoy this part of the project. It's so much fun to just draw, color, because you don't have to think about much. We know you could even, one of the things I do when I'm drawing in a lot of negative space, I do this when I teach Hollaball. I make a dot where I'm supposed to be going on with my marker. So it's very clear that that's where I need to color. Otherwise, sometimes you don't pay attention and you end up coloring the shape that you don't want to color. So like, you have to really kind of pay attention here. Okay, so that is the last bit of my negative space all colored in. And now we're going to do some of that color layering. That's going to give us the rich look that is no longer going to appear just to be flat and graphic. So I've gone ahead and worked out these colors, and the next color I'm going to use is from Polychromos. It's a Faber Castell color, and it's called Emerald Green or Smaragdgrün. So it's basically, what we're doing is prepping the surface for some more shading and more color layering. And it's basically just perfectly matched to this pen. And it's sort of just filling in the little specks of white that maybe you didn't get quite full saturated with your pen. And it's just giving us a nice surface to work on further. So I know you probably can hardly even see it on camera, but I certainly can see where I have been with my pencil, my colored pencil, and where I haven't. It's lending a much richer coverage. One of the most important things is when using colored pencils is, of course, I say this all the time, but you can't say it enough, is a very sharp tip, which this is not. So I'm going to go ahead and sharpen my pencil. By having a sharp pencil, you really get into the tooth of the paper without having to press super hard. You don't want to damage the surface of the paper as you layer your colors up. You could also use a watercolor wash as a background, as also a nice way to start layering up on your colored pencils, but I always have a bit more control with the colored pencil than with the brush. If you're a watercolorist, you'd probably feel differently and want to do this with watercolor. So many ways to execute things, so many tools that you can use to get the same look. And now comes the fun part. Now we're going to sculpt these leaves. We're going to make them look like they're actually almost carved out of this bulb by using a nice, rich, dark to shade with. It is a dark sap from Luminance. And where is it? Here we go. So what we're going to do is shade, just like with the star, the Muka star, we're going to shade around the edges of the leaf shape, in this case, not the Muka. And that's going to lift it up off the surface of that green, making it look like there's like an undercut there. Really get down in these corners, in these crevices, because that's where it would be darkest if this were actually a physical carving, right? You are definitely going to have more of the shadow on the underside, like here, than maybe up here. You don't even have to do the shading on every single side. Your eye fills in, but definitely where there's like the light coming directly on top, you'll have this undercut. And again, you could wait till the very end to do this after you've done the leaf color. You can figure out your method of work best, how it fits you. So one of the other things that we're going to have to do to make this ornament look like a sphere is we're going to want to shade it a little bit like a sphere, even though there's all this ornamentation on the surface of it. And we do that by always making the right side darker than the left. We're always imagining that the light is coming from the upper left, and by doing so we make this really a believable sphere. And I'm also darkening the edges, right? Because if this is a ball and a sphere, the light goes over it, and then those edges would be in shadow. So they can be darkened because that indicates the roundness of the form, right? This is called light on form. So it's going to be lightest up in here and here where the belly of the ball is arcing up toward the light. So that's pretty good already. And I'm going to, you can see though that there are some pen strokes. I think, let me just see the pen strokes and the kind of painterly graininess of the colored pencil. We're going to clean that up by using our colorless blender. I'm using the Copic colorless blender, or Copic, I'm not really even sure how to say it. And I always have a piece of paper nearby so that I can, before I go on my work, clean up the tip. And we're going to start blending. That's what this is. This is a blending tool, and it's basically melting the wax base and these pigments together. And then it smooths everything out and gives you a nicer transition. You don't have that hard line. And then the other nice thing about blending this way rather than with a wax pencil that's colorless you don't have to press hard and you can keep building your color on top of it. So I really like these solvent blenders for that reason. You can keep adding more and more without really degrading the quality of the paper. Always clean. And I'm not belaboring this. I'm hitting it up is how I say it. Just kind of hit it up. You can use an eyelash stroke to sort of feather it out. A little bit like painting. A little bit like using a brush. Just gives it a more finished and polished look. And of course, you always want to, when you're doing your shading, you don't want to put so much down that you lose these light centers of highlighted areas, sort of. And I'm going to also get out my permanent green that has a little bit more yellow in it, and I'm going to put some of that in these center areas just to kind of brighten things up. I'm actually burnishing further. So burnishing is done 3 different ways, either with this solvent burnisher like we just did, a solvent blender, or you can blend and burnish with a lighter color of the same color family that you're using, and or you can use the colorless pencil. I'm pushing quite a bit harder now than I was before, and that does really kind of smash down the paper, and at a certain point you can't add any more colored pencil. It doesn't take to the tooth. So keep that in mind. So now I've got a nice saturated background. And it's time to go on there with our paint. We're going to make our leaf gold. Today I'm going to be using this color of my FineTec Gold watercolor paints, and I'm using a Koblinski number 3 round brush, and I'm going to paint right over the drawing and the ink. That's why it's really important to have permanent ink also. We're going to not worry about that because the little stroke that's showing the midrib and the veins is going to give us a guideline for when we go to shade these. So see, I can still see it. You can do 2 coats of this and get really, really opaque, but I like having that little bit show through so we know right where we're going to shade. And it'll all kind of be incorporated in the end. As the paint begins to dry, you notice that there are some little areas where the coverage is not as good, and then you can go back in there and add a little bit more. If you don't want these veins to be too visible, you can keep building on that, but just save enough visibility of those so that you know where you're going to shade. Okay, I am so far that I'm going to go ahead and let this dry. I know you can see that there's still a lot of pooling and sheen, which indicates that this paint is very wet. We don't want to go over the top of that with shading until it's completely dry, and I mean really completely dry. Otherwise, you're going to pick up the tooth of your paper and you're going to ruin it. So I will be back as soon as this is dry. Okay, so let's go on and do our last part of shading, which I have to tell you, I recorded already once, and for whatever reason, the recording stopped rather than went on, and I have to record it again. But I did want to mention that because what I did do is, since this is all this gold, I was able to go back and erase all of my shading off of it. You can see I've picked up a few little lines here, which I will fix with my new shading. So, you know, if you really, really hate something, you can take your plastic eraser and go over it, erase out what you don't want, and try it again. So this is a pretty forgiving process. But I did want to mention to you that what I did do, and I could not erase, was I went in with my 01 Micron pen, and I picked up restating some of these lines where there's crossover because they got lost when I painted the gold. So I restated it there, and some here, here, and you know, you can restate wherever you want. You don't have to really re-outline everything, but there might be some lines that you feel would look better if you put them back in. Restated some here, one here. This could use a little bit just so that it's very clear. So now we're ready to shade the gold, and I have chosen to work with brown ochre. It's a Faber Castell Prismacolor. Don't mind my red dot. I always use those so that I can share my colored pencils in class. I need to get a sharper point than that, so I'm going to go ahead and sharpen it. And as you can see, we can still see some of my line work here from under the gold, which I'm using to help me guide my shading. Where I'm going to go is I'm going to find that midrib, and I'm just going to shade around it and pull it out into the leaf shape, always saving out the edge so that it remains bright and shiny. But the midrib, the veins, I'm really trying to get those shaded, and I'm using this kind of circular motion of my pen, my stroke. So it's pretty well matched, but I think you can see, especially when I go like this, where the shading is. It's subtle, but it does sculpt the leaf immensely. So don't leave this out. It really makes the whole thing more kind of Baroque-like or antique-y. And it goes pretty fast. It's quite a forgiving surface using this gold undercoat. And we really don't need to burnish it because it's so close to the gold in color. It's just ever so slightly deeper and richer. Shows up great in person. I know you can't see it as well on camera, but it really is showing up in person. So to really understand this shading, what I'm doing, go back and look at my Sampson YouTube tutorial. You'll see much better because that one is done in gray tones, and it's quite a bit more clear what I'm doing. Now, the only other thing that we want to make sure to shade is where we have some crossover and overlap of our leaf patterns, like right here. Just like with Hollow Ball, we want to shade where that happens because it's going to lift this leaf up and push that one back. Same way with here. And this time I'm using actually a sepia color, and it is the Prismacolor Sepia because it's quite a bit darker. You could also make some really darker darks in the leaf shading that way. You can add some wherever you think it's necessary. Here's a crossover. We definitely need some there, and we definitely need some here. Some over here. A little bit of crossover here. And then one final thing that I like to do is I take a very thin Prismacolor. It's called Very Thin. It's the type of pencil, but it is from Prisma. It is quite a bit thinner tip. And I'm going to go ahead and lightly, well, actually I'm almost embossing now on this gold, but I'm going to make some fine lines to restate those midribs and veins. But it's so much better than using just your pen because it looks a little bit more realistic, a little bit less in your face and more subtle. And these are just those finishing, polishing touches that are going to make your piece. Could even put a vein there. You could add extra veins. So I think I got them all. I did add a little bit of shading up here too on that gold, just to knock it down so it doesn't look so bright and brassy. And that is the shading. Make sure that you have the whole ball rounded. This could actually use right there on the gold also some shading, because that is indicating that that's the edge, right? So I'm going to just blend that out with my blending stump. And then for my little ornament tag, I'm going to do a very, very fine just seed stitch. Oh, I think I'm going to grab an 005. It's kind of like a little chain stitch. Okay, so just give it a little bit of a curve. And then I'm going to give that little bit a drop shadow with my graphite. And you can blend that out with a tortillon just to give it a little bit more of a diffused shade look. And there is my Christmas ornament, Sampson. Well, that's it for my ornament today. I hope you've enjoyed making this little companion piece to our Muka star, and that you will join me next time for another holiday-inspired lunchtime tangles. That's it for today's tangle. Thanks for joining me. If you like these lunchtime tutorials, please give them a thumbs up and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I also invite you to check out my website for classes that I have scheduled, or to purchase my tangle tags for your favorite step outs. That's bowtangle.net. I'm leaving you with some other links too. Zentangle.com, where you can learn more about the Zentangle method from its founders, Rick Roberts and Maria Thomas. You can also visit their store there for a multitude of Zentangle paper tiles, tools, books, and kits. Tanglepatterns.com is that site I talk about, where you can explore hundreds of tangle patterns, read about them, and get the step out, which is basically the deconstruction of the pattern. And finally, if you'd like to share your beautiful results with me and my student community, please join Annie's Bowtangle Alumni Facebook page. We're a private group where we inspire each other with our work and offer tips and useful information about art and Zentangle.